Welcome to Social Venture Partners Dallas. We are so grateful that you have joined us today. This is our 11th in our Respond series that we have started since COVID-19 pandemic. And we have had some wonderful conversations with leaders from across the region. And we are grateful to our panelists today who will be joining us. Social Venture Partners is an organization of engaged men and women who bring their time, their talent, and their financial resources to work on the capacity of growing the capacity of social impact organizations in our community. For over 20 years, we have been doing this work in Dallas, and we have been leading conversations around racial, economic, and gender equity. And we will be doing so again at our social impact conference in Dallas called Big Bang, and we do hope that each of you will join us for that. We are always grateful to our sponsors. We appreciate the work of Forward DFW and helping us promote the series. Something Good Consulting and Wright Knatzer Law Firm have been long supporters of Social Venture Partners, and we are very pleased that you are with us today. So I would like to begin by introducing our panel, Nico Leone, who is the president and CEO of KERA. Nico, we are delighted that you are joining us today. But personally, I am thrilled to have another Italian in Dallas. You know, there's only about 200 of us. And so I'm glad that you are here and that you have joined us in Dallas. So thank you for being with us on this presentation today. Our next presenter on our panel is Catherine Cuellar, Director of Communications, Outreach, and Marketing at the City of Dallas. It is such a delight for me to have Catherine back with me on another SVP stage. We were reminiscing that it was 7 years ago when I first started at SVP that Catherine joined an esteemed panel for our Legacy Luncheon series at Big Bang. And just to have Catherine with us is always a pleasure and a treat. So thank you, Catherine, for joining. Our next panelist is Craig Davis, who is the new president and CEO of Visit Dallas. Craig, it's wonderful to have you with us, given that you have just come from Pittsburgh, the best city in the country. Now, I know this is a big D Respond session, so we have to talk about and focus on Dallas, but I also recognize that it has to be a little bit of a step down for you to come from a city where they have the most Super Bowl wins here to Dallas, but we'll ignore that for now. But I do want to welcome each of you to the panel. It is great to have you here. You each bring a perspective to the city of Dallas that our audience is not privy to. You have insights to things even though you are new and or returning to us. So Catherine, I'm going to start the conversation with you. First, let me say welcome home. I have to tell you that when you made the decision to leave Dallas and move to New York, I was devastated. It was like Dallas was losing its heart. But the benefit was just back in November, I had the opportunity to be with you and share some drinks and conversation in New York. None of us would have ever thought we would be here when we were having that conversation. So welcome home. Thank you. Tell us about the new role that you have recently accepted and what it's like to be back in Dallas and how your perspective has changed after being gone for a while.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you again, Tony, even virtually. And I was bold to move to New York City because I have friends through SVP Dallas, like you, who were so gracious to introduce and connect me to a number of people who became colleagues and friends there. I also am very grateful to be home and to be employed at a time when I know that so many are feeling the health and economic effects of COVID-19, and to the extent that the city that made me the woman and the leader I am today is dependent on common sense in government. I'm doing my best. So this is my first time to work in the public sector, and I have a portfolio that includes communications for my peer directors in departments citywide who are trying to address the effects of COVID-19 through testing, through eviction protections and fair housing, through eviction protections through rental relief in the Office of Community Care and the Housing Department, and through small business support through the Office of Business Diversity and the Office of Economic Development. So these are the ways that the city of Dallas is going to determine its destiny and whether this is something that makes it sink or makes it bounce. And it's really just a great honor and pleasure to be working with so many dedicated public servants who are rolling up their sleeves and doing the work of helping our most vulnerable neighbors.
I can't imagine a better spokesperson for the city of Dallas than you. So congratulations on the role. Has your perception of Dallas changed? Did leaving and coming back change at all for you, how you see Dallas?
It changed a lot, and all for the good. I would say the first and most remarkable change, I joked when I got to New York City, I started earning man money because the state of New York has actually outlawed asking what your prior revenue, or rather income history, is when you apply for jobs, because they found that that was perpetuating the gender gap in compensation. So suddenly I was being paid for my skill and my worth, and not just based on my historic salary history. So that was a big and welcome jump. It was a pleasure and a little bit of a shock to be in a faith community where all of the houses of worship were so progressive. I was thinking back to Martin Luther King Jr. Day of this year and of last year, when I went to the Riverside Church where Martin Luther King Jr. spoke 1 year prior to his death against the Vietnam War and about the need for a war on poverty, and heard a conversation with the Riverside Church's Congresswoman AOC, moderated by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And that was a house of worship that my husband and I had been to on Sundays prior to moving to New York City. So it was just a big shift in terms of being in a place that kind of fulfilled my lifelong dream. Calling back to Nico's work at the local public broadcasting affiliate, I got to live my lifelong dream of being on Sesame Street. I knew my neighbors, my butcher, my baker, my coffee roaster, and my pasta maker all on a first name basis. You talk about having an Italian community here in my neighborhood of Williamsburg, Brooklyn. The street lamps were painted green, white, and red. And unfortunately, all of those small businesses have gone belly up since we left. So the New York we left is not the New York we moved to, and it's going to be a really hard fight back because they don't have the public spaces available the way that we do, but we also have a lot more private land than they do. And so I can't imagine being sequestered in my 600 square foot second floor walk up for the months of quarantine. It's nice to be able to have some physical distance socializing here.
Catherine, we appreciate that. We look forward to hearing more about that as the show progresses. Nico, thank you for being with us and welcome to Dallas. You know, I don't remember exactly the date of your welcome party, but I was fortunate enough to be there. And I think, you know, you probably, was it January, February? When did you start here in Dallas?
February, so it hasn't been too long yet.
It hasn't been too long. Talk to us a little bit about why you accepted the position here in Dallas, and obviously how you have had to rethink things in your plan to lead KERA through this time.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and thanks for having me today. Yeah, this has been such a unusual way to settle into a new town and a new role, and really has been nothing but shifting thinking and priorities since arriving in February. I grew up in small towns in Kansas, moved to Texas right after high school. I've got a couple degrees from Baylor, where I met my wife, Nicole. We moved down the road to Austin after grad school, where I worked for a tech company for a few years. And since then, I've been in public media. So I ran a music station in St. Louis and an NPR station in Kansas City, and I'm proud to serve on NPR's board of directors. So when I started exploring the role here at KERA, it felt like a great intersection of both personal and professional interests. And first and foremost, just an incredible opportunity. KERA has a sizable audience, great relationships in the community and strong financials, and at the same time, a tremendous amount of opportunity to grow, which is really exciting. And on a personal level, most of our family lives within a few hours of Dallas. So while we're new to North Texas, this does feel in a lot of ways like coming home. All that said, everything that I thought was going to happen in my first 6 months has been completely wrong. And starting in early to mid-March, we've really had to center our work around three questions. First, how can we take care of staff and put them in a position both to be sort of safe and secure and in a position to do their best possible work? Second, like any other nonprofit in the area, how can we maintain financial stability? And finally, and most importantly, how can we better serve the community during these extraordinary times? And I think we've done a pretty good job in each of these areas. We've seen a pretty significant increase in our digital audience, and thankfully revenue is holding up well, largely thanks to the generosity of that audience. So we haven't had to do layoffs or furloughs, and I think staff really is in a good position to do their best work. We've been able to add 6 reporters at a time when news organizations across the country are having to cut staff. We made pretty significant changes to our TV schedule in the spring and through the summer to help children who are learning from home and to help address summer learning loss. And we did some work in partnership with Dallas ISD on that front. We launched KERA Helps, a bilingual tool to connect people in need with agencies offering support, and worked with more than 30 community partners to help them raise funds during North Texas Giving Tuesday Now. So we're continuing to ask the question every day of what the community needs from us, but I'm incredibly proud of the work my team has done over the past 6 months and the ways that we've been able to respond and be of service to the community.
Thank you. Nico, as you think about this and you think about Dallas and the local work here, how does it compare to your colleagues around the country? Is Dallas better situated? Are we leading kind of the recovery, or is it all pretty much stagnant in your perception?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question for us to think about, because we do so much work with other stations across Texas and with other communities around the country, and a huge part of what we do is tied to national partners who bring a great national and international perspective. I don't think there's really a single answer to that question. I think there are ways in which Dallas and to some degree the state of Texas has weathered these crises better than others, and there's some places where we're struggling, but those ways aren't dissimilar from what we're seeing in other communities across the nation. I think there are definitely some natural advantages. It's a very generous community. There are a lot of people who have been eager to step in and help the community respond. So I don't think there's really a singular answer to that question.
I appreciate that. Greg, I'm going to turn it to you and ask you, to share a little bit with our audience about the work of Visit Dallas. You led a similar organization in Pittsburgh called Visit Pittsburgh, and perhaps some of our audience is not as familiar with the actual work. But I can't imagine taking a leadership role at a time like this with an organization whose dedication is basically to conventions and visitors, and in a time when that whole industry has been pretty much decimated. And you arrived here, I think, in January, right?
Yes.
And so share with us a little bit about that experience and what the work is.
Sure. You set it up very, very well for me, Tony. The work that Visit Dallas does is we bring in conventions, visitors. We lead economic development in the tourism space to bring people from the outside in, to spend money, to stay in our hotels, to eat in our restaurants, to pay for services. We bring in millions and millions of visitors every year. The tourism economy in Dallas is huge. And with this with COVID, it has really been a very different story than what Nico had just said. When I arrived, some people also said that I brought COVID with me. We went from what was going to be the best year on record for Dallas to what we have now. And it's really a very different, you don't want to argue who's had it worse or who's had it better for COVID. Some organizations, some industries have had, some devastating hits on them, and tourism and travel has been amongst those When I first started here in January, February, and March in Dallas are the highest grossing months for tourism in convention space because everybody wants to be in the South in those months. Nobody wants to be up north where I came from. And so we went from aggregate occupancies in the high 70s, low 80s in the hotels, almost overnight down to single digits. And the hotels after COVID had to furlough and release about 90% of their staff. And those people still largely remain unemployed. At Visit Dallas, when I came here, we had 92 staff members, and now I'm down to 44. And we have about 19 on furlough right now, and the rest have been permanent layoffs, unfortunately. So we are actually doing quite well under the circumstances, and are really and truly sort of hunkering down and making sure that we're ready for whatever's going to happen next. The good news is that Dallas is on front of minds of meeting and convention planners. However, they're booking way into the future. The short term doesn't look very good for us because we're in the business of crowds, and until people start to feel comfortable about being in places with other people, it's going to be a slow walk back for us. But I'm very, very bullish about the future of tourism in Dallas. You're muted, Tony.
Tell us a little bit about why you took the role. What was it about Dallas that made you come?
Well, I was recruited. It is, I was in Pittsburgh for 28 years, and 20 of those years I spent with Visit Pittsburgh. And I had 3 jobs at Visit Pittsburgh. I started as their VP of convention sales, and then I became their EVP, and I was their CEO for the last 7 years of my career in Pittsburgh. But I wanted a bigger city. I wanted something that would be more aspirational. And Dallas is amongst those places in the United States or in North America. I grew up near Toronto, Canada, and I was actually recruited for the Toronto position. I turned it down because I knew that Dallas was more my calling. And this is one of those cities out there that people really gravitate to. This is amongst the biggest and the brightest future cities that in my business that people want and are attracted to. So I was very ready for a new opportunity, but I wasn't going to go to a similar destination or a similar market to Pittsburgh. I was waiting for a big market to come, and Dallas came. And there's not that many out there. So this is amongst one of the very few places that I would have been open to be recruited to. So I'm sort of being introspective here, but I'm riding this COVID out. There's no other city that I'd rather be than in Dallas right now, because the future coming out of this is going to be incredibly bright.
I appreciate that, Craig. Thank you. Catherine, a question back to you. Nico talked about one of the priorities being that, they took care of their employees. And I think that probably one of the first things that you had to communicate in your role was furloughs of City of Dallas employees. These are real men and women. These are men and women who are servant leaders in our city and have done great work for us. What is going on there? What is that like? How does the city, kind of understand its role in laying off or furloughing staff? And I know there are major budget cuts, but how's the city thinking about real people who are being affected by this?
Well, it's obviously a very difficult decision, but it was necessary largely due to city facilities that have been closed since March due to the governor's and county orders related to COVID-19. You're correct, hundreds of people have been furloughed in the months since I started, a number of them my former arts and culture colleagues, as well as those in libraries and park and rec centers. And the city has maintained its focus delivering core services and innovating to reassign employees from those departments which remain closed when possible, but also providing those services that we know our residents who are also feeling the health and economic effects of COVID-19 need more than ever. So we're piloting some parking lot Wi-Fi at 4 branches. We have Chromebooks and Wi-Fi hotspots available for checkouts from the library. The libraries remain closed, but we have curbside service available. And the Park and Rec Department is offering rec at home activities for people who have been cooped up due to the social isolation of COVID-19 for months. I look forward to the day when we can all gather together again in public spaces. And I have been on both sides of being the person communicating furloughs, and I've been laid off. One of the things that precipitated my move to New York was the fact that I had been laid off from my employment here last in Dallas. I know that when you're getting laid off, it's never personal, it's just business. But knowing that odds tell us that more than a quarter of people are now behind on their rent and mortgage because of COVID-19, that hundreds of people in Dallas County and more than 100,000 people nationwide have died from COVID-19, and each of them leaves a family, leaves a community that is bereft and unable to come together to grieve, but then is also potentially facing the loss of a breadwinner. And then to multiply that times the tens of millions of people that we know that are facing unemployment. Everyone I'm working with in City Hall is doing their level best, and our field employees likewise, to continue delivering core services. And when it comes to the relief programs that we have for the health and economic effects of COVID-19 related to especially rental and mortgage assistance, we know that our best effort is still insufficient to the demand. And that's really hard.
Thank you, Catherine. This stuff is really hard. Craig, I know that in the revenue that supports your organization comes from the city collecting the hotel tax, and obviously that revenue is dramatically declined. How will that affect the future in your own operations? About when the recovery does start, will you have the funding to promote Dallas worldwide that you need to?
I'm going to go back a little bit. When this first took place, we had a group come in and do a economic forecast for us called Tourism Economics, and they're based out of Philadelphia. Their home office is in Oxford, England, and they are the gold standard for these types of forecasts in our industry. So we had them come in, and they said to us that this is 9 times worse than the combination of 2008 and 9/11 put together. And so they said that our crawl out would take many, many years. So just to put this in perspective, we're going to see in 2020 more than a 50% drop in revenue than we had in 2019. Our forecasted hotel revenues, and that's really where we make our money, Visit Dallas. We're supported through a piece of the hotel tax. Forecasted hotel revenues in 2021 will be 33% lower than those that we collected in 2019. And then, the visitor spending in 2020 will decline about $2.5 billion. And that is the city receives a lot of tax from the people that come in from outside and spend their money here. So people from outside of Dallas support Dallas services in a pretty big way. And I think a big part of the revenue drop for Dallas City is predicated upon the drop of not having visitors come into the economy. So right now, to answer your question more of a succinct way, we are going to be okay because we have some reserves, and we're thinking that we're going to start coming out of this and start getting into a lower level, but at least some steady level of income in about March of next year. So that's the bad news. The good news is that our competitors, quite frankly, are in the same boat. So nobody's going to have more money, perhaps maybe Vegas, but we don't really compete against Vegas that much. They might be the only one, but everybody is going through this. And I think that some of our counterparts around North America or the world may end up by closing their doors by the time this is all over with. But our competitors are going to be in the exact same boat. We're going to have to take a hard reset and look at the way that we've spent our money before, our services. And this has been, in many ways, a cleansing, but I believe that Dallas is really well positioned. We have a lot of business, about a convention and sports business that is on the books We just need people to feel safe to come back, and we're working on those safety measures to make people feel good. But our future's bright. Now, having said that, Dallas is a drive market. So there are a lot of people that live in Dallas, a lot of families, and we know that people are going to start to travel by car to see their families first after. And I think probably a lot of people that are watching this webcast have already done that. They've gone to see their family if they can drive to see their family. We know that that's going to happen first, and we have a lot of our visitation in the past has been through visiting family and relatives. So we're very strongly positioned for that. We're also strongly positioned as a big city to draw from the outside for what we call staycation. So a lot of people in Dallas are actually coming into Dallas for the weekend and staying in a hotel just to get out of their house. And then after that comes, we believe that sporting events, particularly amateur sporting events, will follow. And then eventually conventions will follow. They'll start small and then they'll get back. We believe in about a year from now, we'll be back to sort of where we were pre-COVID levels in terms of having the people come into the city, but it's going to be a slow climb out. So the silver lining is that we get to reinvent ourselves and really reestablish what we want to do and how we're going to do it. And that's happening as we speak right now, Tony.
Thank you. Nico, I want to turn the conversation a bit to away from the devastation of the pandemic on the economy to the racial reckoning that is happening all across America, and the role that public radio plays in that, and what role you see for your organization going forward. You know, the listening to KERA and having those driveway moments where you pull up and you sit in your car for another 20 minutes until the story is over is not an uncommon experience for any of us because of the depth and the analysis and the power of the stories you tell. I can't imagine a topic or a time more that needs that more now. So what is the role that KERA plays? How do you want to advance that role? What are your plans along those lines?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Tony. And you're right. I think that is the core of the role that we play. And you know, and listening to Craig describe some of the changes in the economy of tourism and travel, and listening to Catherine describe some of the adjustments that the city has had to make, I think our role in those things is helping people understand both how they'll affect our community and how those changes will affect them as individuals. So as you might imagine, we've been wrestling with these questions, you know, both in our response to the pandemic and around these questions of race and equity, as has, I think, every other major institution in the community. And in a lot of ways, I think we're in a very unique position to play a role. We reach more than 2.5 million people every week across TV, radio, and our digital platforms. And beyond just the breadth, I think with our national partners at PBS and NPR, we're also one of the most trusted institutions in the country. And I think that's really important at a time like this when there's so much misinformation floating around. And part of why we're trusted is because of that ability that we have, I think, to help people understand context and understand what's happening in the world around them and how that affects them. So in a lot of ways, I think we do a good job of focusing on these issues and have for years. You know, for example, our One Crisis Away project has spent years covering North Texans living on the financial edge, and that work often intersects with issues of race and gender and equity. So when, you know, coronavirus really popped in North Texas, we were able to pretty quickly pivot that project and start exploring the impact that it was going to have on vulnerable people and vulnerable communities. As protests and this larger conversation around race and equity sort of really accelerated in late May and through the summer, we were able to do similar things. We also have a pretty strong commitment to covering mental health, for example. That's been a focus of ours for about 1.5 years. And I think we're only beginning to understand the impact that these twin crises are having on mental health of different populations. So there's a lot of work that we've done in these areas, but there's more that we can do and should do. You know, I think for us that starts with doing a better job of making sure that our staff and our coverage broadly reflect the communities that we serve. And I think we've got to do a better job of building relationships in parts of the community that are underrepresented in our audience and in media. And frankly, communities that don't really trust media to accurately cover them or portray the realities of their lives. And beyond that, I think there's more that we can do to help convene important civic conversations around these issues, both on our own and with other partners. And I think those last two items are going to be a lot of our focus moving forward as we think about how we can respond, what the community needs from us.
Nico, I know that these conversations internally can be very, very difficult, and each organization has to look, as you alluded to, understanding your own diversity within your own organization and your own calls to equity. Have you looked at your own personnel, and have you looked at and done an assessment there in terms of how well they are representative of the community?
Yeah, we have, and the good news is that there's clear evidence that this has been something that KERA has been attentive to over the last decade. That's not to say we don't have room to improve, because we absolutely do. But our newsroom is almost 50% people of color, which is really unusual in media and in news specifically. There's a number of things that we're working on internally. I think it's not just about diversity, it's also about inclusion. It's about representation and decision-making. It's about equity, both internally and with our audience. So we are having a lot of conversations, but we didn't just start this work in the last couple of months. There's been a pretty long-standing commitment to these issues at KERA over the years.
Nico, I appreciate that you, one of your priorities is to look for partnerships in the community. And in fact, you have just recently joined as a partner for our social impact conference, Big Bang, that we're going to be holding, which is all around racial, gender, and economic equity. And so I am grateful to you for that. But one of the things that Dallas is kind of notorious for is the silos that we all operate in and the parallel ploy. And as long as you're staying in your own lane, everything is great and everybody is kind and everybody is supportive. But it's that kind of real intentional collaboration that really is difficult, but it also, provides better solutions, I think, in the long run. Do you think that the sense of partnership and the sense of joining forces is just COVID related, or do you think that we will carry this kind of forward in our community, that we will look for ways to partner more intentionally than we have in the past?
Yeah, I don't think I can speak for the community broadly on that, in part because I'm so new and my process of getting to know the community has been so disrupted by circumstances over the last 6 months. But certainly for KERA, this is not going to be a passing thing. When we think about that in terms of the businesses we're in news and media, when we think about it in terms of the role we want to play in the community, those are all better when we find the right partners, whether it's to help us, bring in different voices and different perspectives that aren't represented in our work, whether it's to help us reach out and find new audiences, to better serve our existing audience, to bring in younger and more diverse audiences, or whether it's to be partners with us in those important civic conversations. I think on every level, our work is better when we find partners that we're appropriately aligned with, whether they're in the news and media space or in other nonprofit spaces, or even in the business community. Now, obviously, as a news organization, there are some lines we can't cross in partnership because we've got to be able to cover issues as well. But we're more than a news organization, and we have a lot of room to do those things in appropriate ways. So while I think the pandemic and these crises are accelerating our interest in this type of work, I think this is going to be our business model moving forward.
Thank you. Greg, I want to stick with this question, particularly the question around the racial tensions that cities are experiencing and kind of the rhetoric out there that some cities that perhaps are governed by one particular party are more prone to having these kinds of racial issues. How much does that affect the planning in your organization around bringing people back to Dallas? Is that a factor? Do you think about it? Is it even an issue for us here in Dallas in attracting people to come back to the city?
Well, we're certainly not, as a city, on the forefront in national news in that regard. However, it's something that we're very, very focused on. We have always had an eye towards making certain that we were very active in bringing in conferences and conventions that are formed from specific groups. So anything, we've been very active in the LGBTQ community. We've been very active in lots of different national organizations that are that are Black or Latino. So for us, it hasn't changed the way that we sell. I don't think, if I'm really being honest, I don't think that we're getting asked those questions as directly as, for instance, Portland or Seattle. And I'm very good friends with my counterparts in both of those cities. They're getting national news. Now, I think that some cities are probably more prone to have this as a talking point when a convention or something is considering them. Dallas is not really in that conversation. I think our customers believe that we're very welcoming and inclusive.
Thank you, Craig. Catherine, the city is at the forefront of managing racial equity issues and managing racial tensions. And if my audience has been with me for a while, we have had representations from the city managing all of these issues. From your perspective, and from my perspective, the city, I think, is doing an excellent job in, for the most part, managing it. But are the demands for budget that the protesters have been seeking, are those even being considered by city council? Are there any changes to the way budget is being constructed to reflect the changes in budget priorities around racial issues, particularly around policing issues?
Right. So to take those questions in order, the community input has absolutely been heard. In the proposed city manager's budget has more than 80 amendments, which will be discussed by the council tomorrow. So that will be where the proverbial sausage gets made in terms of hammering out what the ultimate budget adopted by the city is. But we are seeing real change, change that is responsible, equitable, actionable, legitimate, and measurable. You get what you measure. And in terms of the formulation of the budget, this is not the first year that our Office of Equity and Inclusion, led by Chief Liz Cedillo-Pereira, has applied an equity lens to our budgeting process. That said, we know that given the economic and emotional and health strain on our city, that the traditional ways of navigating out of a crisis are not going to be sufficient. We are fortunate to be in a city that has a spirit and identity of entrepreneurship and innovation, and an appetite for partnerships like those championed by SVP, bridging sectors and piloting new things to make our city more equitable and more inclusive, but also to uplift those essential workers who have kept the hotels that Craig represents open throughout the pandemic, that have kept the airports clean and the buses running and the trash picked up when people are producing more household waste while they're all working from home all the time. So I think the thing that is of greatest concern to me as we're heading into a Labor Day weekend is that we've had testing available for almost 6 months now, and the conventional wisdom is still that there's a long line to be tested when actually there are no lines, or that there's a long wait for test results when actually results are coming back in a matter of days. And that pandemic, which precipitated this conversation series you're moderating, is still as great a public safety threat as any of the other systemic entities that the budget seeks to address. And we don't know how long we will need to budget for it, because if we had a domestic travel ban and sheltering in place for 1 month, it could be over in 1 month, but that's not going to happen given the economic and political climate we're in. So there's a whole generation of students who are now going to be learning from home for an unknown amount of time, and the effects of that on their health and safety and their family's health and safety is challenging. And I suspect, but can't prove, that one reason that fewer people are getting tested for COVID is because they feel that they can't afford not to work between when they get tested and when they get their test results. And historically, the aims of employers and the aims of employees have not always been in harmony. The aims of landlords and the aims of tenants have not always been in harmony. So we're bracing for a wave of evictions and foreclosures, and we're bracing for a potential second wave of the virus, even as we're very much looking forward this month to hopefully gradually beginning to reopen some of our public facilities closed since March. So it's a multifaceted challenge, and it takes all of us. So I appreciate you saying that the city is managing this well, but the city council casts the vision, the public servants like myself execute on that, but it really takes every stakeholder in the community. And the good news is, because of the civil unrest, because of the appetite for reimagining public safety and taking real action, we have an unprecedented opportunity, and I think the constitutional fortitude to do things that we've never done before as a city.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the difficulty that that goes with making these decisions, and I am glad to hear you say that the voice of the citizens and their concerns are being heard at the highest levels of those who are making the decisions. Nico, how do you work with the city of Dallas to promote these kinds of public interest messages and make sure that the good stuff is being out there, and also the opportunities for things like testing and all of these different things that Catherine has talked about? Do you have a relationship with the city where you work with them to announce these kinds of things?
Yeah, so promote isn't really the right sort of lens to think of that through, but a huge focus of our work has been making sure that people get accurate information, fact-based information, that they understand sort of what they can do to help keep themselves and their family safe, what they can do to connect to resources in their time of need. So I think that's, you know, when you talk about the role of journalism, you know, in many ways, that's a core function of our work, is helping people understand both the landscape around them and how they can connect to what they need. So it's not so much through that lens of promoting, but I think the most important thing that we are doing right now really has been our coverage over the last 4 or 5 months, you know, not just of the crisis and the way it's affecting our communities, but how people can respond, what they can do to be safe, how they can get tested, how this might play out to affect them at this time.
Catherine, you have deep roots here in the arts community, and much like Craig's industry, the arts have taken a major hit. And there were some articles recently in the Dallas Morning News that talked about just how dramatic and how devastating economically the arts have been hit. Any observations? Is there? I know that the city has efforts and private philanthropy has efforts, but how do you see the arts community? Will the arts community in Dallas, which was so vibrant, will it come back?
Well, I will call attention to one initiative of the City of Dallas's Office of Arts and Culture, creating a directory for artists, including those who may be underemployed and unemployed. I think artists are going to light the way, not just for the arts, but for our whole city's bounce out of this valley. Because, as I have told my colleagues at City Hall, because of my arts background and my public radio background in nonprofit journalism, what artists do is make gold out of straw. So whatever economic impact you expect them to have when you're making grants to them, you can add a 0 or 2 after that when you start factoring in all of the ancillary jobs and opportunities, but also just the design thinking and the creative problem solving that is inherent to arts and culture practitioners as well as organizations. So I'm a self-trained, unlicensed social sculptor, and Dallas has been a great medium for me to work in through my various careers. And my husband is a music producer and composer and recording engineer, so I'm still very intimately supporting the arts. But I do think that the arts will not be what they were before. And I'm already seeing innovation through former colleagues like Reed Robinson starting the Cabaret drive-in concert and performance and screening series. And through the arts responding to COVID. The city of Dallas has partnered with a cultural consortium and more than 50 nonprofit partners as part of artist Carrie Mae Weems's national campaign, Resist COVID, Take 6 DFW, which focuses on people of color and essential workers to both debunk misinformation and urge the necessary physical distancing to help us navigate through this. So I think arts is part of the solution. And I think whether it's through the master planning of brownfield sites like Hensley Field on Mountain Creek Lake, or more tactical interventions like the work Downtown Dallas Inc. has done to enable restaurants to expand their footprints onto the sidewalks outside of their businesses. All of those are artful solutions to the challenges ahead.
Well, you know, at Social Venture Partners, we are thrilled that the City of Dallas is co-producing our event, our Social Impact Conference this year called Big Bang, as I referenced, and we hope to feature some of the great work that the city is leading, some of those initiatives. And so we are grateful to your team and to the staff there at the City of Dallas for joining us on that project. Craig, I want to throw this to you in the last few minutes that we have. When you were hired here, you were quoted as saying, "I couldn't be more thrilled to be joining the team of the #5 convention city in the nation, the only Texas city in the top 10, and the #1 visitor destination in the state. Dallas is a city on the move, and I'm honored to be a part of its future." Do you still think Dallas is a city on the move?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that I have been very impressed with is that the growth of Dallas hasn't really changed during COVID. And I'm in the business of bringing in visitors, conventions, and Dallas is still such on everybody's mind. And what I meant to say before through another conversation that you had initiated was that our convention planners we have such an amount of stacked up business in the future. And once we get through this, we're going to come out of this gate probably better than most. Now, Dallas is probably going to take a little bit more time to get out because we're so dependent on large crowds, sporting events. All those things are very natural. And until people feel safe really to come back in those situations, it's going to be a tough road to hoe. But we really believe that that our best days are ahead of us. The work that has already been done by this community, by our staff at Visit Dallas, by our city, by our community partners, to make this as an attractive destination, not only for people that want to live and move, like Nico and I and Catherine all moved into Dallas recently. One of us moved back, but it is such an attractive place for our residents. It's a natural that our visitors enjoy the same things as well. This is such a sophisticated city, and I can't say enough how honored and blessed it is for me to be here. So if I said that before when I was sitting in Pittsburgh, I'm amplifying that by 1,000 times right now.
That is really encouraging to hear, and I appreciate the optimism for our future. I want to ask each of the panelists just to do a bit of a personal reflection on the last few minutes about how you have been changed, how your thinking has been changed, how your lives have been changed by the last several months that we have endured as a community, and as a nation. And Catherine, I'd like to start with you if you have any personal reflections that you want to share on how this all has changed you.
Thank you, Tony. And I also just want to thank my fellow panelists and welcome them to Dallas and say what a pleasure it's been to spend time with you here, and how I look forward to seeing you and working with you in person in the future. For me, this role with the city of Dallas is the job I was born to do in hindsight. My career, beginning with public broadcasting at KCRW in Los Angeles and KERA here in Dallas, continuing with public utility Encore, public art as executive director of the Dallas Arts District, where I was first a speaker with you at Big Bang, and then as a public transit board member for DART. All of those things have in common the public, but I've never worked in the public sector. And I am so grateful for the journalism of my former colleagues, including Sam Baker, Bill Zeebles, Sujata Dand, and Chris Boyd, to keep our citizenry engaged. The opportunity I see is that Dallas had a really anemically low level of civic engagement when I lived here before, and I will be intrigued to see if the social action of recent months translates to ongoing engagement at the local level, because I do believe all politics are local. It's strange at a time when people are talking about fake news, as I'm sure it's interesting for Nico's team at KERA, to be the voice of facts and science and reason in government at a time when suspicion of all those things has never been higher. And I'm using every part of my brain every day, every which way, to figure out how to do that best. And I know I can always do better. And that's why I'm so grateful to you, Tony, for your friendship, leadership, and guidance, and for the work of all the social venture partners who are carrying that bold vision throughout our city, and who make Dallas home for me, for all of these panelists, and for all of the people who are going to make Dallas a great place to be and better than before as a result of this.
Thank you, Catherine. Craig, any personal reflections as you reflect back on the last few months?
Well, it's been terrifying. When you watch the industry that you know and love kind of crumble before your eyes, as I said, that, in the hotel community and probably the airlines, which are a big part of what makes us tick, when they're sometimes losing 90% of their staff, I have really had to sort of reassess sort of the way that I approach things. I am a bit of a control freak. I've always been able to really move my own personal destiny by either working hard or working differently or collaborating or asking the advice of others. And now I really feel as though it's that old adage, you shouldn't worry about that which you cannot control. So this has been a really difficult situation for me, because I really have to, we're doing everything we can. We're poised for a great recovery, but until that time comes, we have to be smart. We have to be agile. So I've really had to go from sort of letting it, going away from my own personal control to letting things kind of happen. But in the meantime, I've been able to reconnect with friends and family and loved ones. Coming to Dallas, I've been able to, not knowing too many people here at all, I've used the opportunity to really reach out and to get to know as many people as I could. COVID had put a real strain on that, but I'm back trying to get out there. It is my goal to know the people I should know very, very well. So I'm going to add my thanks to Catherine's, and thank you for your invitation, Tony and Nico. So great to serve on this panel. I was at your reception when you were first brought back into Dallas, and that may have been one of the very last public things I did before this all went down. So I'm just very thankful for this city and for the welcoming that I have received. So I think that you could say in a word, I have a lot of gratitude for my current situation.
Nico, how about you? Any closing thoughts of how it's changed you?
Well, first, I'd echo both Craig and Catherine's thanks. It's been great to spend some time with you, Tony, and with them. And I think I share Catherine's curiosity about what this will mean for civic engagement in our community going forward. We're clearly at a time where many people are more engaged than they have been in the past, and it'll be very interesting to see if that sticks and what will that what that will look like. And I also think I share Craig's optimism about our future and about what a recovery will look like. The last 7 months have been nothing but change. I think it's impossible to move to a new city and take a new role like this without it affecting and changing you under normal times. And these are anything but normal times. So more than anything else, I think it's given me a deep sense of gratitude to the people I work with, to frontline responders, to public servants, to the business leaders and philanthropists who are helping our community respond, and a lot of gratitude to our audiences who are continuing to turn to us to help them navigate and understand these uncertain times. I think more personally, it's definitely pushed me to think about safety and security in different ways. Catherine's comments earlier about the aims of employers and employees not always being in harmony really resonate. But I think one of the things that's happened, at least inside of our building, is this crisis has really pushed us to find ways to align those needs and to make sure we're able to take care of the people who are doing work to support and serve our community. So it's really driven a lot of alignment. And I think more than anything else, I think it's taken some ideas that have been longstanding values of mine and of our work in public media, and it's really pushed us to deepen our commitment to those ideals and to do everything we can to ensure that our workplaces and our communities are inclusive and equitable and really work for everyone. I think those are a few of the ways that I've felt changed over the last 6 or 7 months.
Well, I certainly appreciate hearing all of that from each of you. Our city is enriched by having you in the roles that you are in, and I am certainly grateful that you took some time out to be with us and speak to our audience. You know, the work of collaboration is extraordinarily difficult, and you each have mentioned the importance of community and the work that you do. But it is really critical that when this time passes that we move beyond cooperation, we move beyond even collaboration, and really make some intentional and deliberate decisions about co-laboring in this space for the long haul, because the work is so important. And what we have learned is that when suffering strikes a community, it strikes hard, and it can be very devastating. And the social network that we can build together to hold that up in the future and to sustain that really falls to each of us and to the many organizations and the great work that people are doing in our community. And so to that end, I invite our audience to investigate the various organizations that are represented here, investigate social venture partners, join us in our work. In much the way Catherine said, you know, she was made for this moment. I feel like Social Venture Partners has been made for this moment. We have been spending 20 years to really prepare for this moment in time, and we are here and we need your help to make this work go and advance it. So please consider joining the work of Social Venture Partners Dallas. We are also very thrilled to have a other collaboration with the Texas Tribune and with TribFest, and to that end, we will be leading the session like this in just 2 weeks on September 15th. That will be with the city managers from Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio. I will be joined by Kimberly O'Neill, who is a partner at Social Venture Partners and on my board. And we will be having a conversation much like this about statewide issues. So we do hope that our audience will join us for that as well. So with that said, I am grateful to each of you for the role that you play, for the gifts and the talents that you bring to the city with your leadership. And most importantly, Catherine, I am so glad that you are home where you belong. So thank you all. Thank you to our sponsors, to the SVP partners, to our board of directors, and particularly to my own staff who does this work and does it so well. For such a small team, you are very mighty and you have my gratitude. So thanks to each of you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.